I'm Aaron Berkowitz back for the JLJ with Suzette Sheft, author of Running for Shelter, out now from Amsterdam Publishers. So thanks for being here, and I'm glad you could take time out. I know you're still in school, so I'm glad a weeknight worked out for us. First question is just sort of what inspired this book.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so I started writing this book when I was 13 years old, and one of the initial things that influenced me to write it was the death of my father to pancreatic cancer that same year. And so he used to tell me stories every night before I went to bed. But as time passed from his death, I realized, that I started to forget the stories. And so I always wished that I had taken the time to record them, especially because they're so important to my family. And so in that sense, my father's death revealed to me, the importance of preserving the stories of our loved ones before it's too late. And actually, during the writing process, I was even, further inspired when I came across a survey that was conducted in 2020 by the Claims Conference on Gen Z students' knowledge about the Holocaust. And I'm a member of Generation Z, and it revealed a spike in anti-Semitism and a decrease in awareness of history. And basically, an overwhelming number of people in Gen Z had no idea about anything related to the Holocaust. And so clearly, this demonstrated that traditional methods, of sharing the stories were not getting through to them. And so this ignited even greater urgency to share my grandmother's story to teach people of my generation.
Okay. Well, first, I'm sorry about your father. Second, just in order of operations, you started this book before that survey, or you started it because?
No, I started before the survey, but it revealed, even greater urgency to write it.
So how do you sort of see like this story or these stories, or the power of a story, perhaps even better, sort of helping people learn from history or history itself?
Well, to me, at least in my personal experience in school, I know that when I read personal stories or personal accounts of history, they stay with me a lot longer than a single statistic or a textbook passage would. And so, and because of this, I think that personal stories allow people to find personal connections with those characters in the story and allow them to it gives them like a raw perspective of the events rather than just a number. So, yeah.
And I know this is like a young adult novel.
Yeah.
Do you see it as because of the survey it made more sense to write for young adult? Is it because of your age, or why that style?
I think it's a mix of both. So my personal experience in school was that I learned very little about World War II from classroom lessons. So most of my knowledge came from hearing family stories and reading YA novels, which I had the privilege to do because I have a survivor of the Holocaust in my family, and I also am Jewish, so I'm like privy to those events. And while reading the YA novels, the dialogue and storytelling captured my attention in ways that history books didn't. And so if it captured my attention at the age that this book is geared towards, then I think it would probably capture the attention of other tweens and early teens.
So is that sort of like the audience you think is that your age group, or do you think it could also sort of?
Well, I'm 16 now, but I started writing this book when I was 13, and it's mainly geared towards ages 11 through 14, I think. So kind of middle schoolers and early high schoolers.
Got it. And walk me through that process of writing. I mean, you're 13. I assume you have obligations in general. So what's the writing process like for you?
Yeah, so I started, as I said, when I was 13, and what I did over the summer, I started the interview process over the summer. So I spent a week with my grandma, and I interviewed her every day about her escape. And at first, she shared elements of her life, like her apartment, her family dynamics, and then she started telling me about the war and how she had to leave her home and all of those details. And it felt to me like she almost remembered everything. She would provide me with even like the smallest details and anecdotes. And as she spoke, I would record those stories and those details in bullet point form and sporadically ask for more information. And then at the beginning of each conversation, so I was there for a week, I would recap what we had previously discussed and make sure everything was correct. And then she would keep going. And then after that, after I started the writing process, I also watched an interview she had done 10 years prior with the USC Shoah Foundation. And this video really helped me, widen my perspective and uncover other stories and details missed in our conversation. And soon after that, I began writing the first draft. And while doing that, I would, of course, call her, send her drafts, and ask her questions to make sure everything was accurate.
I imagine that's a complicated sort of procedure where you're like thinking around a story, but you're also thinking, there's a real person. So how do you sort of balance like what you can tell or what you might not want to share with her, or it's always just carte blanche, everything has to be shared?
I shared every single draft I wrote with her, and so I would say like 98% of the book is true events. There's no story that is not true. There are only small details that she did not remember that I kind of had to make up. But before I made up any of those details, I would always call her and make sure she was okay with it, because I wanted to truly stay to her personal story. So I always shared everything with her.
Cool. And then when you finished, was it like I should find an agent, I should do whatever, or was it always just sort of like you wanted to go to this public, I know Amsterdam is known for its Holocaust books. So is that always like the goal?
Well, the goal was to always be published. And, I was so incredibly grateful that Amsterdam Publishers chose me, especially because I was, at the time they chose me, I think I was 14. I had no prior history in writing. My book was not at the same stage or level it's at now. And so I think the goal was always to just share it with the world, and in whichever method it ended up being shared in, I would be happy with. But I'm so incredibly happy that I ended up with the Amsterdam Publishers.
It's definitely an accomplishment. I think at any age, but especially at yours. I'm thinking, because my grandparents also were survivors. I think a lot of times it's interesting how we think of silence and trauma and survivorship. And as somebody who's not Gen Z, but do you think like with your generation and this book, like where does the limit go with sharing? Is there oversharing, too much sharing? Is it, history, so you can share whatever you want, or how do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's important to share everything. I think that history should be shared, especially because I feel like my generation, as the survey showed, we know very little about the Holocaust in general, and whether that's a result of schooling or sheltering, it's probably a mix of both. So I think that it's important that all facts and all stories are shared, because sheltering won't do any good if these events actually happen to real people.
And do you think that stories are the primary way to sort of help people in your generation learn what happened in the Holocaust? Do you think it has to be more history? Do you think or what do you sort of see as the antidote to the ignorance?
Well, I think that so in New York, where I live, there is for public schools, there's a mandate that they have to teach the Holocaust. That was a rule, but clearly, but New York had some of the highest rates of like they did not know anything about the Holocaust. Like most of New York did not, and so I think clearly that history method was not working, and so I think that personal stories are probably more interesting, and they capture the same essence of the Holocaust. And so I think that personal stories are a great way to share. And I also think that we have the chance now to talk to survivors, and we might be one of the last generations to have that opportunity. So I think that's also a great way to learn more about the Holocaust too.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I teach high school, actually. That's my day job
Really?
in New York.
Which subject do you teach?
I teach English as a new language.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's always interesting when we get to the Holocaust sort of portion. Oftentimes I'll go in and speak to classes, but it's also interesting to see sort of it's a very Western thing. It's like not taught necessarily in other countries, so it's always interesting when we show images or we talk about it, and then I'm like, oh, my grandmother was like there, and like so it is. I agree with you that the personalization of the facts and the images that are almost removed because of how far, quote unquote, far back they are in history. It does help when somebody's there that can speak and has experienced it in some fashion or form. Do you think that there's more books about
Sorry
this?
about my dogs. If you
That's okay. digital interviews, that's what happens. As I'm sure we're aware over the last couple of years with digital classes, there's always something. Do you think there's going to be more books about this, or do you think this was like a one-off? How do you sort of see this?
For me,
Yeah.
well, I am very passionate about the Holocaust and sharing stories of the Holocaust. I had a personal connection to this one, which is why I chose to do, but I would love to interview more survivors and write more books. So yeah, that's always the goal, to preserve more stories. So definitely.
And how does it feel like going to English class now with a book out? Oftentimes we see authors as removed, but you're in class with other students who read book, how does that sort of work?
Well, I still view the authors as very renowned, the only difference that I notice after having written a book is probably the attention. I pay greater attention to the language used in the writing. So for example, if a writer uses a certain phrase or something, I would look at that and say, oh, I understand why they used that. Or if something was edited incorrectly, I would say, oh, they didn't copy it. But that rarely happens. But
yeah, every once in a while, that was always like a game I think we played as kids, like who could find the one comma missing or the one misspelled word in a book. I think that's still a game I play sometimes. But yeah, it's interesting to be on the other side, right? To like see it from the artist's perspective as the artist, not just as sort of the consumer. So I imagine that allows you to sort of see things perhaps that other people or other students might not. Have you ever thought of like analyzing your own work in that way, or how do you sort of edit your own work?
Well, for my own, you mean for my book? How did I edit it?
Yeah.
So I went through many rounds of editing. So first it was in a very, very, very rough stage, and I was able to work through it. I was taking a class at Cho over the summer. It was online, but through that I was able to edit some of my writing. So that was when I had first started writing the book. And then I also, once it was in a better stage, I was also able to work with an editor. So that was really helpful. And I also, every time I would, read it and go through it, I would always make edits, make small changes, look for wordiness, look for different ways to cut it down. But
cool. And do you think of yourself as sort of a writer now, or you're still a student, you're still not sure what you want to do? Or like, do you think, I know you said you wanted to write more with about, from survivors and things. Do you think that that's like the future for you, or do you think it's like a side kind of project or something you do in addition to something else?
well, I think when I'm older, I would love to continue writing and recording stories of the Holocaust. I don't know how accessible it will be when I'm older, because the generation of Holocaust survivors is unfortunately slimming. And so, but I would love to continue to be an author when I'm older. That would be an absolute dream.
Yeah, it's nice to be like involved. I find, for me personally, like when I'm writing, that's the most honest I can be without, it's just sort of a very nice solo process. And it's interesting you're interested in the interview process. So that's I find helpful when, writing dialogue or things like that, is to actually talk to people and figure out what do they sound like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. I didn't know, was there anything I missed about your novel that you wanted to share?
Oh, no, I guess it's coming out on November 9th, so stay tuned for that.
And where can people find it?
You can find it on Amazon, and also on November 9th in New York City, we will be hosting an event from, I think it's from 6 to 7 at the Corner Bookstore.